Welcome back to our channel on this beautiful day. Today, we bring you an incredibly tense and heartbreaking news update from Genoa, as the devastating consequences of a shocking tragedy threaten to change the lives of the Abbott and Newman family forever. Will Sally be able to overcome this crisis? Will the baby be saved? The situation has never been more tense, so let's explore the heartbreaking details unfolding right now. The sterile, blindingly bright corridors of Genoa City Memorial Hospital transformed into a chaotic epicenter of trauma and despair following a catastrophic confrontation that shattered the night. The flashing red and blue lights of multiple police cruisers reflected off the sliding glass doors, casting an eerie, pulsating glow over a scene of absolute devastation. Billy Abbott, a man who had spent his entire life navigating the treacherous waters of corporate warfare and family legacy, found himself violently thrust into a nightmare of his own making. The cold, unforgiving steel of police handcuffs bit deeply into his wrists, a stark and brutal contrast to the tailored suits and executive boardrooms he was accustomed to. His hands, trembling uncontrollably, were stained with the blood of Sally Spectra, the woman he loved and the mother of his unborn child. As Detective Burrows solemnly read him his Miranda rights, the words seemed to echo through a thick, suffocating fog in Billy's mind. The charges being leveled against him were severe and life-altering, encompassing aggravated assault and the chilling accusation of attempted murder, instantly stripping away his identity as a powerful executive and reducing him to a desperate criminal suspect caught in the absolute worst moment of his fractured life. In the claustrophobic confines of the police cruiser, and later within the bleak concrete walls of a holding cell, Billy's psychological state completely unraveled into a chaotic abyss of torment and disbelief. His mind relentlessly replayed the fateful, deafening echo of the gunshot, a singular moment of violence that had irrevocably altered the trajectory of multiple lives. He desperately insisted to the arresting officers, to the stone-faced detectives, and to the tormenting ghosts within his own mind that the entire horrific ordeal was a catastrophic accident. The confrontation had ignited over the toxic, festering secret of Newman Media, specifically the clandestine financial payout Sally had accepted from Adam Newman to protect her company from Victor's impending wrath. Billy's recent descent into blinding paranoia, fueled by the stress of his Chancellor takeover and the earth-shattering revelation of his true paternity, had convinced him that Sally was actively conspiring against him. He had tracked her down, armed and consumed by a toxic delusion of betrayal, intending only to demand the truth. He maintained that the weapon was drawn in a moment of frantic, paranoid desperation, and that the ensuing physical struggle over the firearm resulted in an unintended, tragic discharge that struck Sally down in her tracks. The unbearable weight of his conscience began to crush Billy with the force of a collapsing building as the reality of his actions fully materialized. He was not merely a man who had accidentally shot his partner during a heated dispute. He was a father who had unleashed lethal violence upon the vessel carrying his own unborn child. The sheer, soul-crushing agony of this realization drove Billy to his knees within the holding cell. He wept openly, his tears mixing with the dried blood on his skin, as he was consumed by the terrifying knowledge that his reckless obsession with power, truth, and vengeance had physically destroyed the very future he had sworn to protect. The haunting mental image of Sally collapsing to the cold pavement, her hands instinctively flying to her stomach in a desperate bid to shield their baby, and the profound, absolute terror in her wide eyes before she lost consciousness, played on an agonizing, continuous loop in his shattered mind, pushing him perilously close to the edge of a total psychological breakdown. Meanwhile, miles away from the cold isolation of the police precinct, a desperate and frantic battle for survival was unfolding beneath the harsh, unforgiving glare of the surgical theater lights. Sally Spectra lay suspended in a terrifying limbo between life and death, her body subjected to the intense, invasive trauma of emergency surgery. The room was a symphony of controlled panic, filled with the urgent commands of trauma surgeons and the frantic, rhythmic beeping of vital monitors. The medical team worked with feverish intensity to stabilize her massive internal bleeding, fully aware that they were fighting a highly complex war on two distinct fronts. They were not only battling to save the life of a critically injured young woman, but they were also engaged in a delicate, perilous struggle to protect the fragile, developing fetus nestled within her womb. The extreme physical trauma of the gunshot wound, combined with the catastrophic drop in her blood pressure, posed an immediate and lethal threat to the pregnancy, turning every passing second into a desperate race against the encroaching shadows of death. For Sally, Even in her unconscious state, the biological and psychological echoes of her past trauma loomed heavily over the operating table. The universe seemed to be subjecting her to a cruel, merciless repetition of history, dragging her back into the agonizing nightmare of maternal loss. The devastating memory of losing her first child, Ava Hope, with Adam Newman, was a deep, unhealed scar on her soul. Now, the very real possibility of losing another child, this time at the hands of the man who had promised her a lifetime of safety and devotion, added a layer of profound, tragic irony to her physical suffering. Her body, already weakened by the severe trauma of the projectile, fought fiercely, drawing upon deep, primal reserves of maternal strength to sustain her own fading life force, while simultaneously attempting to shield the faint, vulnerable heartbeat of the innocent life she carried. Pacing the sterile linoleum floors of the hospital waiting room like a caged, predatory animal, Adam Newman was a volatile manifestation of profound grief and lethal, unadulterated rage. He had been present during the catastrophic confrontation, caught in the crossfire of Billy's unhinged paranoid break, and the sheer trauma of witnessing Sally fall had ignited a dark, dangerous fire within his soul. Despite the incredibly complicated and often painful nature of their current relationship, Adam still harbored a deep, enduring, and fiercely protective affection for Sally. The agonizing thought of her bleeding out on a cold operating table, fighting for her life and the life of her unborn child, simply because of Billy Abbott's toxic, uncontrolled delusions, was pushing Adam to the absolute brink of his own fragile sanity. He stared blankly at the swinging doors of the surgical wing, his mind consumed by a terrifying helplessness that he had not felt since the tragic day he lost baby Ava. Adam's internal monologue rapidly crystallized into a chilling, unwavering vow of absolute vengeance against Billy Abbott. For decades, Billy had paraded around Genoa City draped in an unearned cloak of moral superiority, constantly judging Adam for his dark past and ruthless tendencies. Yet, in one catastrophic moment of weakness and paranoia, Billy had committed an act of violence so heinous and destructive that it entirely eclipsed their long-standing historical rivalry. Adam completely and utterly rejected Billy's desperate defense of an accidental discharge. In Adam's eyes, bringing a loaded weapon to a confrontation with a pregnant woman was an act of unforgivable, premeditated recklessness. He silently swore to the sterile walls around him that if the deeply flawed legal system failed to bury Billy Abbott for this atrocity, he would personally ensure that Billy paid the ultimate, agonizing price for harming the woman he still cared for. As the horrific news of the shooting rippled outward, sending massive shockwaves through the elite circles of Genoa City, the Abbott and Newman defense mechanisms violently sprang into action. Victoria Newman, despite her own chaotic, treasonous entanglement with Kyle Abbott, and her paralyzing fear of her father's impending wrath, was completely horrified by the unfolding tragedy. Her incredibly complex, deeply intertwined historical relationship with Billy compelled her to intervene. While she was appalled by the violence, Victoria fundamentally understood the fragile architecture of Billy's mind. She recognized that he was a profoundly broken man, suffering from a severe psychological collapse, not a cold-blooded, calculating killer. Acting with the decisive, ruthless efficiency that defined her corporate persona, Victoria immediately began mobilizing top-tier legal defense teams, understanding implicitly that the public narrative had to be aggressively controlled before the media and the district attorney could permanently crucify the father of her own children. Simultaneously, the devastating news struck Jill Abbott with the physical force of a catastrophic blow, threatening to shatter her already failing, terminally ill body. Suffocating under the rapid, agonizing deterioration of her hidden illness, Jill was suddenly faced with a mother's ultimate nightmare. However, the primal, fierce maternal instinct within her completely overrode her profound physical weakness. Jill absolutely refused to allow her son to spend his final days, or her own final days, rotting in a maximum security prison cell due to a tragic manifestation of his mental illness. Drawing upon hidden, desperate reserves of strength she did not know she still possessed, Jill commanded the vast, formidable resources of Chancellor Industries to construct an impenetrable legal shield around Billy. It was a desperate, final crusade for a dying matriarch who knew her son was deeply, perhaps irreparably flawed, but who loved him too fiercely to abandon him to the merciless gears of the justice system. In an unprecedented and highly formidable display of unity, a powerful alliance formed between Jill Abbott and Victoria Newman, Two fiercely protective, incredibly resourceful women who had spent decades navigating historical family grievances and corporate warfare completely put aside their differences to work frantically toward a singular goal. They pooled their immense financial resources and strategic brilliance to build a robust, aggressive defense strategy. Their legal team focused entirely on amplifying the narrative of a tragic, unintended weapon discharge occurring during a highly charged, emotionally volatile dispute, heavily emphasizing Billy's recent, documented psychological distress. They prepared meticulously to fight the impending, highly aggressive attempted murder charges, fully aware that they were not merely preparing for a standard legal battle against the district attorney, but that they were actively arming themselves for a brutal, scorched earth war against the most dangerous and unforgiving man in Genoa City. High above the chaotic streets, in the shadowy, imposing confines of the Newman Enterprises executive office, Victor Newman received the news of the shooting with a chilling, terrifying calmness. While the rest of the city reacted with profound horror and deep sorrow, Victor's weathered features hardened into an impenetrable mask of cold, calculating, and absolute triumph. For decades, Billy Abbott had been a persistent, infuriating thorn in his side, a reckless, entitled boy who had repeatedly brought chaos, pain, and instability to the Newman family. Now, in a spectacular display of self-destruction, Billy had willingly handed Victor the ultimate, irrefutable weapon for his own permanent annihilation. Victor felt absolutely no sympathy for the tragedy. Instead, he saw a golden, unmissable opportunity to completely eradicate the Abbott threat and permanently remove Billy from the board. Victor immediately set his vast, deeply entrenched network of political and legal influence into aggressive motion. He had absolutely no intention of allowing Billy Abbott to hide behind the cowardly, convenient excuse of a tragic accident or a temporary mental breakdown. Victor planned to exert maximum, suffocating pressure on the police commissioner, the presiding judges, and the district attorney to ensure that the legal narrative remained strictly focused on a deliberate, malicious, and entirely premeditated act of lethal violence. He intended to weaponize Billy's recent erratic behavior, his aggressive corporate espionage at Chancellor, and his public, volatile outbursts as irrefutable proof of a dangerous, unhinged criminal mind. Victor was systematically orchestrating a legal and public relations siege designed to ensure that the attempted murder charges not only stuck, but resulted in a maximum sentence, effectively seeking to bury the Abbott legacy under a mountain of inescapable scandal and criminal conviction. Back at the hospital, the suffocating, heavy tension in the waiting room suddenly shattered into a million terrifying pieces. The rhythmic, steady beeping of Sally's heart monitor, which had been the only source of fragile hope, abruptly accelerated into a frantic, high-pitched, and continuous alarm that echoed chillingly down the sterile corridors. Medical personnel flooded into the hallway, shouting urgent, desperate orders as Sally's physical condition catastrophically deteriorated, her vital signs crashing as her body began to lose the brutal war for survival. Simultaneously, in the cold, damp concrete holding cell at the police precinct, a heavily burdened detective approached the steel bars, his face grim, to deliver a medical update to a violently trembling Billy Abbott. The devastating news of Sally's sudden, critical crash pushed Billy over the precipice into an abyss of absolute, paralyzing despair. The horrifying realization that he may have just crossed the ultimate point of no return hung heavily in the stagnant, suffocating air of the cell, leaving Billy completely shattered and facing the terrifying, unresolved prospect that the woman he loved and the innocent child they had created were slipping away into the darkness forever by his own reckless hands.